it's Adam here again from Genesis of Androzani, doing another uh, After Midnight special. Um, it is currently even later than it was the last time I made a video, but my life schedule is so hectic at the moment that this is the only time I have to film this video, so apologies if it's a bit rambly. Um, Don't worry, this is not going to be another unpopular opinion video. Though it is another discussion video of sorts. It's a specific topic video, though it's not an unpopular opinion. Connor has asked me to do the very easy task. He's asked me to do the task of just comparing Doctor Who, the revived series, compared to Doctor Who, the original / classic series, as it's more commonly known. Now, later down the line, I'm sure we'll actually delve deeper into a full, proper, breakdown of what differentiates the two. But I just kind of wanted to touch on a few elements that I thought would be a good discussion point, and also for other people to bring up, and sort of elements I think what separates them, but what makes certain ones more enjoyable, what makes people prefer the classic over the new, and the new over the classic, for example. But the one thing the one sort of idea that I struggled to compare between them was tone, because in the Russell era, there's sort of a clear tone, but even episode by episode, that kind of shifts and goes everywhere just due to the nature of the show. And by that same token, in the original series, you'd get serials which overall are pretty dark in tone, but then they would have a few comedic individual episodes, or vice versa, more lighter fare, but within that would have darker elements. So that's something that kind of crosses across both shows in terms of the tone really changes consistently episode by episode due to different writers, and also different locations, and just different ideas for because this show can do anything. It can go anywhere in the universe at any point in time. It can do whatever it wants. So you might get a more grounded historical than a Douglas Adams style whack space pulp adventure thing. So tone is something that I really struggle to compare between the two shows, because in and of themselves there's no one distinct tone. It changes constantly between showrunner, between writers under the showrunners, and sometimes even in the classic series episode by episode, definitely in the new series episode by episode, sometimes even in two-parters. But I thought, what are other things where you can have a more specific breakdown of the key differences of the shows? And the one big one that jumped out to me was story structure. Because in the original series, as you know, it was serialized television, where one story would go across multiple weeks, and with several episodes in between, the average being 3 to 4, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but generally speaking, 3 to 4 episodes was the sort of standard. And whereas with the new show, as you all know, it is episode by episode, more typical modern drama structure, in terms of it being limited by its episodes, only having, well, it used to only be 13 episodes, then it went down to 12, then it went down to 10, but they lengthened them obviously for no reason, because Series 11 was boring. Well, it did have its merits, but if you want to know mine and Connor's opinions on that, they're all there on the channel. Go check them out. Again, excuse me for being so uh, this. It is currently... Oh, it's just on 12:30. Wonderful. It is, yep, half midnight, so I apologize for being rambly. But anyway, back to my point. My point being that the structure itself lended it to a more defined distinction in terms of the old show. I want to use the word pulpy in terms of it's kind of like a pulp sci-fi serial, generally speaking. But that's not quite doing a service to all the stories, because pulp usually is kind of associated with schlock, and Doctor Who could sometimes be that, but it was never defined by that. It was occasionally that, but also for every, I don't know, Terror of the Vervoids, there was a Genesis of the Daleks or a Mind Warp or something like that. So again, tone and quality of writing was up and down all the time, just like in the new series. But in the old series, stories had much more breathing room, so that could lead it to some people being considered boring, because things were spread out more, and there was, as I said, breathing room. It was a time for the stories to just unfold. However, if there was a writer who didn't quite know how to continue this science fiction environment, or this historical environment, or just the Doctor Who ness, then serials could really suffer, because it was stuck in the same story for multiple episodes going forward. And if someone didn't like the first episode, then they're going to go into the second episode with a bad idea, third episode bad idea, fourth episode bad idea, bad feeling rather. And it's just, it can be hard to watch for some people if they aren't ready to watch a slow burn. Even really, really good episodes, like something like the War Games, for example, which I think is just perfect television. To someone who's only seen the new series, they would probably really struggle with a 10-episode story. But if you've been watching those characters from the beginning of season 4, yes, I believe season 4, and you've been watching the second Doctor up till here, you're so invested in it. And so in terms of the long game, even though there's no sort of overarching stories necessarily, not often at least, it was quite rare in the original series, there was still this sense of progression and finality to things. There was always a continuation, a forward momentum, despite these stories being isolated. So when you watch an episode like the War Games, it's one that benefits from having seen all the stuff before it, even though they're all individual isolated episodes, which is kind of similar to specifically when Russell was running the show and everything was setting up for the finale, even if we weren't aware of it. So it's just an interesting thing to sort of think about how the end goal for a lot of seasons, or at least the regeneration stories, sort of feel like the way that Russell, and sometimes Moffat as well. Chibnall we have yet to see, but again, only one season, so I'll let it slide, and we'll cross our fingers for something a bit more next season. But it's just, I find it interesting how there's this sort of finality, as I said, just like the new series, how it all sort of leads to this point, and if you've been following these characters. Whereas my long and convoluted and incredibly rambly and unfocused and unstructured point I'm making is, with the new series, a lot of people could just watch one random episode of the new series and enjoy it, but not necessarily feel like they've... very rarely will they be bored unless they're watching Series 11. But it's one where they could watch a random episode from the new series, sit down, watch it for 45 minutes, enjoy it, laugh, or maybe just think like, oh, that was terrible, but then it was over. Whereas with the classic series, generally you're going to have to play the long game, even if you don't watch them all in one sitting. you're going to have to stick through a whole serial, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I love doing that. But from a fresh perspective from either the new series or the old series, it's going to probably be easier for people and more accessible for people, especially in this day and age, because it's a more modern series by the standards of television structure as it is today for dramas and sci-fis and sci-fi dramas and soap operas and all the other things that Doctor Who is or was before it became Series 11. But yeah, I just find it, yeah, it's a fascinating thing to talk about in terms of how again, especially during Russell's era, there was always sort of like through lines that would lead to a point, but you could just watch one episode isolated. Whereas with the classic series, you couldn't watch one episode isolated. You'd have to watch a whole story, otherwise. If you just watched, say, episode 3 of Caves of Androzani, brilliant episode and a brilliant story, but you'd be very lost if you hadn't seen 1 and 2 leading up to it. Whereas, unless it's a finale within a modern series, and within that sort of finale, general last 3, typically speaking, sort of all sort of bleed into one another, leading into certain plot threads and stuff coming forward, generally speaking. Yeah, it's just, such a hard thing to compare, the classic series to the new series, because they are so different. Again, tone is completely different. Story structure is different. It's something that kind of amazes me, how I do believe that the heart of the show was definitely continued when Russell picked it up in 2005. But he kind of stripped it back, but also gave it this new feel, this sort of grungier feel, this edgier feel to it. Because the Doctor was suffering from PTSD, he took big risks and sort of went in a whole new direction, sort of turning it into a melodrama and a soap opera, which for a lot of classic fans they didn't like, which I completely get, because there was drama, yes, in the original series, and yes, there was melodrama, there was sort of this over-the-top flamboyant drama, but there was very rarely that kind of interrelationship personal drama, especially between the TARDIS teams. There was often drama there, but that was drama based on circumstances as opposed to personal drama being brought forward within the story. Again, super generalizing. There was a lot of stuff to sift through, so I'm probably forgetting certain stories where these sort of elements show up. But it's just, they are two entirely different beasts, yet both incredibly enjoyable. Well, for some, because some people want shorter form television, so they'll watch just a new series, or someone wants to sit down and really involve themselves, they'll watch the old series. So it's a very difficult thing to compare, but I find it interesting just how there are certain similarities, but even those similarities in terms of, especially in structure, they come from completely different places. Like I said, with the if you watch all of a certain Doctor's run in the classic series, there's a bit of a finality, unless it's Colin's finale, because go to Big Finish for that. And we're not getting into Big Finish here, because that is just its own monster that would be very, very difficult to talk about. But it's great. I love Big Finish. Or go. Excuse me. Or go get some Big Finish stuff. You won't regret it. Well, get good Big Finish stuff. Davros, War Master, Chimes at Midnight, Scherzo. Anything by Rob Shearman, Holy Terror. Anyway, this is a tangent. But yeah, it's very difficult. And the other sort of category I briefly wanted to touch on was character. Because the characters, when done well in the classic series, were very human and very likable and felt very real. Like Sarah Jane, for example. And the Brigadier, they felt like human characters, even though they were in these very sort of, generally speaking, camp, over-the-top stories. Whereas in the new series, there was a clear goal from the get-go to make it the character drama there. And for me, when I was a kid growing up, that was what I latched onto, was the character drama, and character drama became very important to me. But also, having watched the classic series, I could just watch an episode where the Doctor doesn't get involved in personal drama, just the drama of the environment in which they've been thrust into. So I can completely understand why people who had come from the classic series and suddenly the Doctor's this ex-soldier who's got the weight of the universe on his shoulders, and he's very angry and bitter under the surface. Though I do like the fact that it brought back not quite the air of mystery that the old Doctors used to have, especially Sylvester McCoy towards the end of his run. But Christopher Eccleston especially had this kind of edge, this unease in him, where the character sort of, it felt like he could snap at any moment and something would be different, whereas the other Doctors weren't quite that. But yeah, so in the new series there was clearly an effort to make it more character-based, to give it to survive in that kind of more modern soap opera-y environment. That being said, there was still this inherent goofiness to everything. But in my opinion, both are great, but for completely different reasons, and I've only just scratched the surface in this terrible ramble that I hope you got some vague enjoyment out of. I don't think I've articulated my points very well, but I will probably make a follow-up video onto this later on the line when I've got time and I'm not a zombie. But as part of the Advent calendar, we wanted to get something up for you guys somewhat on time. But thank you guys so much for watching. Tell me in the comments, what are some other things you'd like to compare between the classic series and new series, and what are the key differences, do you think, and what makes one thing not necessarily better, but what might make someone more enjoy one thing as opposed to another thing? I'm just really interested in comparing these two things, because even though they are the same continuity, they are so different. The reboot is completely different. It is its own entity between showrunner and showrunner, let alone it being that gap in between. So yeah, have a discussion in the comments. Let's chat. I'll comment away and reply to you all, and it'll all be good. We'll have a good old chat. I do apologize about this video being even worse than the other one being in terms of rambliness, but as I said, I'll make a follow-up on this later down the line. Thank you so much, you guys, for watching and supporting us through this Advent calendar. It's been an ordeal, so we really hope you've enjoyed it. And anyway, this is me, Adam, signing off. I'll see you in the next video. This is Vandrazani.